All right. Hopefully this records correctly. So let me get you some login information, and I will put that in the chat area. There should be a login URL. This should be the same URL that you would use if you were logging in at any other point. There's also a training username and password, and that will only work during the training. So if you want to go ahead and get logged in using that training username and password, then you can follow along if you wish, or you can just watch if that's something that's better for you. It's totally up to you how you would like to follow along with the training. Once you get logged in, the screen should look approximately like this, only you should only have the training option. I have a couple of different options just so that I can show you guys that like each site, so for example, for your programs, each program site that you would have access to will be in a different folder. So you might have access to a ton of different sites depending on what your area is and what areas you might be able to go ahead and edit or connect events to. In this case, we're going to be doing everything in the training site. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and select that training site. You can see that there are some different things in there. When I select that training site and I go over to this main area, I'm going to find the index page. And the index page is the home page for your site. So that's going to be something that's important to know. It's just the URL is indexed because that's how it has to be in the system. But if you double click on it, it will take you into the preview screen. And I just wanted to take a second to give you an idea of what your program page might look like. So if I go ahead and click on Program Home, this is a general representation of what a program homepage will look like for each of you guys. So it's got some sample news on here. It's got a little bit of text on here. It's got a nice banner and nav bar. If I go ahead and click on a program page, this is just kind of giving us a example of what a page might look like within the program. And I just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of what that would look like once you guys get into your site so that you're familiar with it. So when you're logging in with your own account, you're able to, excuse me, see something kind of familiar. Once you guys are in this screen, we're going to go to the last button that says Training Pages. And in the chat window, I'm going to go ahead and paste each of your names and assign you a page. So Heidi, you are assigned to Training Page 1. Eric, you're assigned to Training Page 2. And Laura, you are assigned to Training Page 3. So each one of you click on the page that you are assigned to in this side navigation area. We're doing this just so that you're not trying to edit the same content at the same time. That is assuming you're following along, of course. That way we just don't run into saving issues since you're all logged in with the same credentials. So once you're on your page, the first thing that you're going to want to do is lock that page for editing. And we do that by going into the upper right corner into this bar and selecting the first button, which is Lock for Editing. And you'll notice it'll make some visual changes. Don't worry too much about the visual changes. It's just kind of saying, okay, we're looking at editing things as opposed to previewing how the site will look overall. Since you guys have your program sites that were moved over already and all your content has been shifted over, the vast majority of what I'm assuming you guys are going to do, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is editing your existing content. And so once we lock the page for editing, you can see that there is this existing block of content. And so to edit that piece of content, there's this button right here in the upper left corner of that block of content that just says Edit Content. And if we click on that, you can see it brings us into this edit screen. You'll notice that the headings look a little bit different. They're not quite as, they're not colored the same, they're not quite as large, those types of things. This particular editor doesn't display all of the formatting exactly. So that's what the preview screen is kind of for. This is just more for you to make sure that you get your edits in. And so we'll go ahead and we'll make some changes to this piece of sample content just so that you guys can get a handle on some of the usages of editing the content with the WYSIWYG editor, as well as some accessibility concepts that we'll go over while we're doing that. I'm just going to go to the very beginning and hit enter just so that I can add some new content. You can obviously delete existing content up in here. So like if I wanted to get rid of that, I can highlight and delete it, so on and so forth. If I wanted to add some new content, I can just type in, my new space. This is some example content for training purposes. So you can see I just added a little bit of something. And that's the basic part of editing, right? The rest of it is in terms of using this editor. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you guys can use bold and italic, underline, those types of things. Those are pretty standard. However, if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. Big thing with lists is if you're going to do lists, you want to make sure that you use the buttons for the lists, either for a bulleted list or a numbered list, as opposed to just typing like 1 period space, 2 period space, for example. And that is for the accessibility of the content that you're using. The buttons will code in the background as a list. So that if someone is using an assistive technology, it will tell them that it's a list, and it will allow them to use that content more effectively. So just a quick thing to make sure that you guys use the lists as opposed to just typing. Now, to start on the second row, you can see that this first drop down says paragraph, and you can see everywhere I click it says paragraph. But if I click down here in this heading, you can see it changes to heading 3. And when you're creating headings, you do want to make sure that you use this drop-down menu as opposed to changing a bold and a color and a font size. And that is, again, for the accessibility. It allows those using assistive technology to know that it's a heading and be able to bounce through those headings in the same way someone who does not use assistive technology would be able to do. So if I go ahead and click on paragraph, you can see that there are some different options. You will never use a heading 1 because a heading 1 is your site title, and there's never generally anything that's a higher priority than your site title. Heading 2 is typically a page title. So most people will start with a heading 3, sometimes an additional heading 2. The thing to note with headings is that you want to make sure that you nest them the same way that you would in Outline. So for example, you would never have a heading 2 and then a heading 4. You would have to have a heading 3 in between so that you would make sure that those nest the same way that an Outline would. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're using these headings. In this case, I'll select a heading 3, and you can see it makes a little bit of change. It makes it a little bit bigger, it puts it in bold, but again, once we get back into that preview screen, you can see it makes some more dynamic changes. It will make the text green and a little bit larger than that, and it might change the font depending on the size or the heading that you choose. It kind of is just up to you which one that is used, but you'll see once we get back into that preview screen exactly what's going on with some of those changes. You just kind of have to trust that they're going to be there. If you do want to use color, you can. There is a color button here. Generally, we recommend not using a whole bunch of colors. just because we are trying very hard to stay within branding compliance with the university, as well as with the accessibility. There is a particular color ratio of darkness to lightness with text and background. And so you can run into some issues if you don't choose dark enough colors in order to make sure that your content is accessible. So that's just kind of a few things with the basics of those. The next kind of area that we'll go over is tables. The big thing with tables is that you only want to use them for actual table data. You never want to use them for layout purposes. For example, you never want to use them to add a caption below an image or to move an image around on a page. And this is, again, for the accessibility. If you wanted to add a data table, specifically for data, you would want to put that on its own line as well. So I'll just hit enter here at the bottom. And then we just select this table button, go to insert table, and this looks very similar to Microsoft Word. You can kind of select the size of the one that you want. Now when it puts it in there, it will look a little funny. It will look small, and I'm just adding some junk in here. And it will look like it doesn't quite match the rest of it. Don't worry too much about that because, again, once we get back into the preview screen after we've added all of our content and made our edits, we will see that it will do a whole bunch of formatting for us. It will go all the way across. It will do some color changes for the rows. It will do all kinds of nice things. The last thing you have to do to make sure that your table is accessible is you do have to highlight this top row, right-click, go to Row, and then Row Properties. And in this row type, you have to change it from body to header. And that just lets the system know, especially in assistive technology, that this is the header row, this is the row that tells us what all of the columns mean. So that's just a very important thing for the accessibility as well. Does anybody have any questions so far? No? Okay, I will take your silence as no questions. So now we're going to kind of get into the stuff that is probably what you're going to be doing most, which is creating links and inserting images. So if you want to create a link, you want to make sure that your link text has context. For example, you never want to put in something like click here, because somebody using assistive technology, it will literally say to them, link to click here, and they have no idea where that goes. And so you want your link text to have some sort of context. For example, if we were linking to the MSU homepage, you could type in MSU or Michigan State University and make that your link text. For this particular example, I'm going to use the words training purposes. So I'm just highlighting the text that I want to make into a link, in this case, training purposes. And then there's this little chain button right here. If we click on that, if it's a link to an external site, some random site on the internet that you wanted to link to, you can just paste the URL in here, and then you can hit OK. And it will put the link in there. If you wanted to link to a document, you would have to go over to this little folder area over here with the magnifying glass and select that. And this will open up a new window for us. Now we have to go to where we want to upload our file to. So we have to twirl open where it says www.canr.msu.edu. Find which site we're looking for. In this case, it's training. We twirl that open. Then we find our uploads folder, and our uploads folder is where we're going to be placing all of our files and images. So if we twirl open the uploads folder, there's a files area, and if we select that, then that's where we're going to place all of our files. That way all of our files are in the same location. And you can see once I select files, this Upload New File button becomes available. So if we go ahead and click on that, then we have to select Files to Upload. And this is where we're going to upload a file from our computer. If I hit Select Files to Upload, I will just use this Microsoft document because I can always remove it later and it's not a big deal. But you can select whatever file you want to practice with if you're following along. So if I just double click on my file, you can see it tells me that this is the file that I'm trying to upload. And then from this screen, we always want to hit Save and Publish. You never want to hit Save. Just hitting regular Save will save the document in an unpublished state, which will create a broken link. And we obviously don't want to have broken links on our site. So we always hit Save and Publish. And it might take a second to upload our file. And you can see that there's a couple of files already uploaded. In this case, mine is this Microsoft document. Once you see your file kind of in the screen, you can just go ahead and click on that file. And you can see that it puts the URL for the file in there and you don't have to worry about it. And then you can hit OK. And now you can see that for me, the word training purposes is now a link to that document. There's some other example links down here to a PDF. So that is how you would add a link to a document or a link to a URL. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. If you wanted to remove that link, you could just click on the link itself and then click this Remove Link button. I won't do that in this case, but I just wanted to point that out for you. Next, the big thing that you guys are probably going to want to know is how to insert images. So in this case, I will just go down here. I guess I'll go to this down here. And with images, you want to make sure that your images are on their own line. This has to do with how the site resizes when it goes down to like tablet size and mobile size. If you don't start out with the link, or excuse me, with the image on its own line, it might page break in a weird place when it flows down to mobile. So you can still move it around. Obviously, the image that's already there is to the right side. You can still use some of the features to move it around. We just start out with it on our own line. So since I have my own line, we'll go up here to this button that looks like a mountain with a sun. That's an Insert Edit Image button. We'll go ahead and click on that. And then in this source area, we'll go over to the area where it looks like a folder with a magnifying glass again. And this is going to look exactly like uploading a document. We have to twirl open cnr.msu.edu. We would find our site in the list. Again, in this case, it's going to be training. In your regular work, it would be whatever site you're working on. Go to the Uploads area, twirl that open, and then select the Images folder. And once I select that Images folder, you can see that there's some images already in here. But I also have that Upload New File button. And so I can go ahead and select that Upload New File button. Select Files to Upload. And then find an image on my computer that I'm going to use. In this case, I will select these pandas because it doesn't really matter. Again, from this screen, we always want to hit Save and Publish. We never want to hit Save because we don't want to save it in an unpublished state and have a broken image. So we always hit Save and Publish. And you can see that now my pandas is in the list of things that I can click on. Sometimes when there's a bunch of stuff in a folder, you might need to click on the folder again just to make sure that it refreshes. I've occasionally had it not refresh automatically, and as soon as I click on the folder again, it refreshes and my image will show up. So now all I have to do is click on that image and it will put the information in there. You will notice that it will automatically fill in the image description with the file name. The vast majority of the time, this is a bad image description because it doesn't really tell them anything about what the image is. It will literally read to them, in this case, you know, image of 1920_1 blah, 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 blah. So we want to make sure that we actually take the time to fill in this image description to make sure that our image is accessible. In this case, I can just type in panda. It doesn't have to be anything like sentences upon sentences. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, just enough that it explains what's going on in the image. That way, somebody using an assistive technology is able to understand what's happening in that image. So that's just something to keep in mind that you really need to do. Once we have our image in here, we can hit OK. And you can see it will place the image in wherever I had that particular thing. You can see this image in particular is very large, but there are these little boxes on the side, and you can just drag and drop, and it will resize the image for you. You can see it keeps the aspect ratio for you. And there's my panda. If I highlight that image and I click on that little Insert Edit Image button again, there is also an Advanced tab, and that is where you can add your spacing. So if I wanted some spacing around this image, I could put, for example, 20 pixels of horizontal and vertical space around that image, if I so chose. And if I hit OK, you can see it kind of moves it around. If I wanted this image moved over to one side or the other side, I can do that as well just by highlighting that image using the Align Right or the Align Left. You can see that it moves stuff around. It adds that word wrap for you. So that's still something that you're able to do. You just kind of have to do it at the end. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions? All right. If you wanted to insert a YouTube video, you are able to do that as well. Again, you would want to do that on its own line, and then there's just a button next to the image area that is red that looks like a YouTube button, and then you can just paste the YouTube URL or code into there, and it will insert that video for you. The big thing to keep in mind with videos is that they do need to be closed captioned for accessibility. So just make sure that any videos that you're embedding in your site are in fact closed captioned. If it's a video that you do not have, it's not your video, for example, you might be better off creating a link to that video as opposed to embedding it on the site, just to make sure that everything on the site is accessible as much as we can make it. So that's just kind of a thing to note about adding videos. Does anybody have any questions about how to use the editor, how to edit their content once they get into their site?
Allie, I assume after the training, you'll add our individual program pages to our access things so that we can see how it's laid out? Or?
When you log in with your actual A&R credentials, you should already have access to all of your program sites and your program pages.
Oh, okay.
It's just not in the training one.
Yeah.
I just didn't want somebody to be messing around.
Go play around with it, yeah.
Yeah. I want to make sure you guys understand what you're doing before we run into issues with existing content. So kind of the last big thing that I want to make sure that you guys are aware of in terms of editing your content is up here at the top, there is a history tab. It's the fourth tab in. This is exactly the same as the revisions tab in Expression Engine that you might be familiar with. So it keeps, every time you save and publish, it keeps that version for you. And that way you can bring back previous previous versions if for some reason you mess something up and you really need to bring back a different version. And so I just want to make sure I pointed that out for you. And it looks like I forgot to lock for editing at the beginning. So that's something you have to do as well. You have to lock that piece of content for editing. Generally, you should do that at the beginning, but as you can see, it lets you start editing even if you didn't do it. So you can do it at the end if you absolutely have to. Once I lock for editing, you can see that there are some different options. You can hit save and keep on editing, so you can save multiple times if you want throughout your editing process. I haven't had this system kick me out in the way that Expression Engine used to, but it can't hurt to save it with any frequency. And then once you're done and you're ready for your stuff to go live, you can go ahead and hit save and publish. And so that's what we'll do right now. And now you can see that my heading is larger and green. My table looks better. My images over to the side, all the font is correct. So you can just kind of get an idea of what it will look like once everything is set up. And one thing to note with this system is that it doesn't have the delay that Expression Engine had. Once you hit save and publish on something, it goes live right away. So you don't have to like play around with trying to worry about, did it go live, did it not go live? You can immediately go to your page and see that it went live. So that's a very handy thing with example for this system. Does anybody have any questions on editing your content? Any last minute things before we move on to adding new content? No? Okay. So if you wanted to add some new content to this page, you can select add content here and then new content. And it will ask you what type of content you want. Typically, when you're adding content from this screen, you will almost always be selecting content generic. And that's your text content with your images and your video. That's what it's called in this system, is content generic. So if we click on that, you can see it brings us back into this same kind of page that we were just in. Typically for the title, since it's not displayed anywhere, what I like to do is I like to put a little bit of blurb of something for the site so that it's easier for me to search for later. So in this case, I can type in training, and then I'll just type in example content. You can title it whatever you want to. Like I said, this title doesn't display anywhere, so it's up to you how descriptive you want to be in terms of your title. The next thing that you're going to have to do, and this is really important, is you have to change this host. You have to change it from cnr.msu.edu by twirling it open and selecting the correct folder site. In this case, it's training. In your regular login, it would be whatever site you're working on. So if I select training, that will make it so that it's in the right spot. If you don't do that, there's a help area, and the first question in the frequently asked questions area down here is related to this issue. You will get this error that says something about not having permissions to do what you're trying to do. So the help area with the frequently asked questions is a good area to check if you are trying to add generic content and it's giving you a weird error. Typically, it's just managing to change this host. And then in the body, again, this is all the same stuff that we just talked about. So I'm just typing something basic in here so that there's some text in there for when I save. You can type in whatever you would like for this sort of purpose. I just wanted to make sure that I pointed some of those things out when you're creating new content. And you can use whatever text content you would like for that. Obviously, when you're in your own sites, you would be using content that was relevant to your site. So once you kind of have something, some kind of blurb in there, you can go ahead and go over and hit save and publish. You can see if I scroll down, it kind of put it at the bottom. Sometimes it puts it in random places. Sometimes it's in the middle. Sometimes it's at the top. I have yet to find a good logic of where it puts stuff. But so you just might have to scroll around on your page in order to find it. Now, if you want it in a different spot, you can absolutely do that. There are some arrows right here. There's an up arrow and a down arrow. So if I click this up arrow here, now it's in between, it moved it up one. If I click it again, now it's at the top. So you can move your content around as much as you want to. You can also, like, let's say I didn't want this piece of content on this page anymore. I want to keep this, but I don't want this on here anymore. There's a red X, and if you click on that, you can close, and it'll just remove it from the page. It does not remove it from the system because pages and content are sort of separate. Pages are more containers, and the content is the actual content itself. So you can still find it in the content search, which is the area that we'll talk about next. But you can at least get rid of it off of the page if it's something that you don't want on a page. Does that all make sense? All right, if nobody has any questions about editing content or adding content to their page, we can go ahead and move on to the content screen. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do for this screen is hit publish page. And if we publish our page, you can see it automatically unlocks the page for us, brings up back all of the graphical elements. And now we have our page that is live with our images and all of our changes on it. The next area that we're going to talk about is the content area. So if we go all the way over to the left, the second button down is content. You hit that and then search. You can see it brings us into a screen that looks something like this. I usually, in this filter area, select the advanced button so that I have all of the fields in which to search by. Because this is a giant list of every piece of content for every site you have access to. So this can be very long and very difficult to navigate if you don't understand how to use some of the filters and different things. One of the big things that you're going to be able to do is this top button here. There is a filter. This currently says all, and you can filter by different types of content. These are what we call content types, these top ones, and then these bottom ones down here are what we call page types. Typically, what you'll probably be doing for you guys is either content generic. You guys might be searching for something that's a content. Or you might be searching for an event or a person. So that's probably the majority of what you guys are going to be doing. There is an article content type. However, the article process for your extension pages is not changing. So if you have an article, you still need to send that to communications in the current workflow of whatever that is. You want to make sure that you continue doing exactly what you've been doing for articles going through A&R Communications. Do not submit them through dotCMS. So that's something that's very important that you guys make note of. If we wanted to add a new item, in this case we'll go through an event. I can select event from the drop-down menu, and you can see that there are some existing events in here. And you can also see that there are a bunch of new search fields. So if I had a bunch of events on my site, I could use some of these fields to find the specific one that I'm looking for. If you're currently using event services for your events, you can continue to do that the same way, and they will create the events in dotCMS and make sure all the things are set up correctly for your site. Yep.
Allie, I have a question. You said something about the articles obviously need to be submitted in the way we are now, but will those articles be positioned in our pages? It might be specific to that, or is that something we can do?
They will be put into, well, actually, Sean, now that you're on here, do you have an answer to that question?
Yeah, so when we post the articles on the website, the premise is going to be that we put it in the most appropriate location, and that's likely going to align with the sites that you have access to. So you could have access to things once they're posted in case you note a change is needed or something like that. So you'll have access to them. We just are going to keep the submission and editing and posting process out of dotCMS, at least initially, because we think that's going to help our editing process remain efficient.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. All right. So if you wanted to create a new event, and you weren't using event services, for example, you wanted to create a new event on your site, I filtered by an event, and then I just hit add new content, and then you have to hit add new content again. And this will bring up the form, essentially, that allows you to fill in all the information for your event. The first thing, again, we have to do is we have to change this host. This is something that happens on most of the content types, so we just have to hit the drop-down menu, twirl open canr.msu.edu, and then find the site we're looking for. In this case, we're working on the training site. Next, we will fill in our title. So I just typed in a random title, example training event. You can see it will fill in the URL automatically. You can change that if you want to. That's totally up to you. You will also notice that you will have to fill in a summary. Anything in red is required. As we kind of go through some of these fields, you'll also notice these little bubbles. If you hover over them, they give you a little bit of information about that field. In this case, this is telling us that this is a required field and that it can't be more than 256 characters. So it has to just be a short summary of what our event is. In this case, I'll just type in, this is an example event for training. You can type in whatever is appropriate for your event. There is a main image field. You can upload an image for your event. Again, you'll go through the same process that you would any other way, uploading your image into your uploads folder under your image. I won't do that in this example. If you put an image in, you want to make sure you fill in that image description. That's very important for the accessibility. You can also put in an image caption as well, totally up to you. These last two are a little bit different. The 3x2 horizontal image is typically used if your main image is cropping a little funny in the list of events or news or whatever that you're using. So you probably won't use that a whole lot, but if you do notice that there's some sort of weird image cropping issue, you can use this 3x2 horizontal image in order to correct that cropping issue, or a square image if you're dealing with a call-up. Next, we'll select our start date. In this case, I'll select next Thursday. Then you would enter your time in here. We have that separate time field so that you can type in a regular time, or you can put in something more generic if it's something that, for example, maybe starts after a different event ends. In this case, I will type in 10:30 a.m. to 12 o'clock p.m. because that's when our training time is. You'll want to put in your location. For a webinar, you could just put in webinar, Zoom meeting, or whatever. If it's an actual location of a place, you would want to put that in. So like, for example, I could put in MSU Pavilion. There's also a geolocation area, and this allows you to search for specific places, and it will pull the address so that maps can be generated and that kind of thing. So in this case, I can type in MSU Pavilion, and you can see that very first one is MSU Pavilion. It's on Farm Lane. So if I click on that, you can see it will add the address, latitude, longitude, these types of things as well. And that can help with the information for your event. Contact information, you can just put in the contact information for whatever person is or entity is doing that. In this case, I will put in my contact information, which is just burke@msu.edu. And then in the description area, you can see it's got the full editor, and this is where you would put all of your main event information. I don't really have a whole lot for this, so I'll just put this is the description for the event. We won't get anything too crazy in here because we just went over how to use the editor. Lastly on here, there is a link field. Specifically, this is for registration links. It automatically creates a button that says register. So it's very important that you don't put other types of links in there. You only want to use registration links. So I imagine this is typically not something that's going to be used unless you're doing registration type activities. Does anybody have any questions on events so far? Nope. Okay. We'll go ahead and scroll up. The last kind of main thing that we have to make sure that we do is set up what are called relationships. And this is very important for making sure that our event gets in the correct feeds. So if I hit relationships, you can see for event there are some different types of relationships. For most of your purposes, most of what you're going to be doing is a data set relationship or potentially a place relationship if it's for a location. If you're doing a data set relationship, most of your Sean is sending me some information. So the Sean is telling me that you probably won't need to fill in the location field if it doesn't, as most of them already exist in the system. Do you have anything else that you would like to say about that, Sean?
Yeah, sorry if the message was confusing. I just wanted to clarify. In your example, when you filled in the location and the content tab, the pavilion would be a place in the system. So you wouldn't fill out the pavilion in the content tab. You would just use it doing this relationship thing that you're about to cover.
Sure.
However, most of people within Extension are going to be using places that are not in the system and never will be. So they would fill in that field on the content tab and not use the place relationship. So
typically do what I showed you how to do, just I chose a bad example. Is basically what Sean is getting at. So I'll have to choose a different example in the future. Each of your home pages for your program sites will be data sets. So what you'll probably need to do is to find the data set relationship, which in this case for events is the third one down, and kind of follow it all the way over to the right-hand side, and then hit the relate button and hit relate again. And it will bring up this menu. And then in the title field, you'll kind of just fill in one word or so that will allow you to find the correct site that you're trying to place this event on. In this case, I'll type in training. You'll scroll all the way down to the bottom and then hit search. And this will bring up every data set that you have access to that might match those words. In this case, there's a couple of different ones that I have access to. You should only have access to the website training one. You will then select the checkbox for that data set and hit relate. And so you'll see that it will add that data set relationship. If you wanted to add that event to more than one site that you have access to, more than one event listing you have access to, you can go ahead and hit relate again and do it an additional time for as many sites as you want. In this case, we only need to do it for the one website training. That is the big thing with the relationships, that you want to make sure that you get that data set relationship correct. So that it shows up on your site correctly. Sean, do you have any other things that people might need to know about relationships that I'm not covering?
The only thing would be that we would typically want the extension events related to the organization extension.
Okay. Yep, so in addition, you would do an organization relationship. And it's the exact same way. I can't do it on this training site specifically because I don't have access to, the training site doesn't have access to the extension site that I'm aware of. Yeah. So I can't do that organization relationship. But you would want to do an organization relationship to MSU Extension. If for some reason you don't have access to do that, you're unable to do that, you can go ahead and contact Sean, and he should be able to help with access questions if your access is not correct. So now that we kind of have our relationship in place and our content is filled in, we can go ahead and hit publish. You can see it added my example training event into my events. If we go back to the pages area and hit browser, and then we go into training pages and then find the page that you've been working on, you can see if I scroll down to the bottom, now my training event, my example event that I created with the data set relationship to website training, it now shows up in my practice events listing. So that's kind of a way that you can check to make sure that you set up that event correctly, is just checking your events listing to make sure that you set up that data set relationship exactly the way that you needed to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that all events are moved over yet. So there may be some differences in events. If you don't see an event that you put in Expression Engine, eventually they should be moved over. But I don't believe that they are moved over quite yet. But you can still do them in dotCMS They might just not show up in all of the expected places. For that data set relationship as well, you might also need to relate to a county data set if you want it to show up on your county page. Like I said, there might be multiple data sets that you would have access to that you might want to relate that event to ensure that everything shows up in all of the places that you want it to. Does anybody have any questions?
I guess I have one kind of big picture question. So I'm assuming the expectation is that the educators that are getting this training are going to be just doing small edits on pages, not trying to have everybody learn how to do adding all their own events and adding their own articles and adding their own everything. Because, I guess I just was thinking that the communications, Maddie or Mallory would be able to, still edit and do all that stuff for us. And then we're just going to be able to go in and make minor changes that we're thinking of, I guess.
Sean, I think you might be able to answer that question in terms of expectations better than I am.
Yeah, I can handle that. That's 100% correct. Communications is going to handle the big picture stuff. If you have a website that you feel needs some major revision, that's not anything we expect anyone to tackle themselves. But at the same time, we want to allow people the freedom to, when they have new content, to get it up right away. If they have old content or old text that is outdated, we don't want them waiting on our availability to open up. If it's a simple change, you can just make that yourselves.
Okay.
For the bigger stuff, you can always come to us.
Good. And then if you are choosing, or some people choose to do, I don't know, things or bigger things, is there any level of review, I guess, on the back end?
Yeah, so the big difference between this system and the old system in Expression Engine is that things go live right away in this one. And so there's no submit for review and then it's kind of vetted and then posted live on the site. It's going to go live right away. However, anytime there's a change on any page, it goes into our review workflow, and staff here will look at those and sort of quality control review them after the fact. But if you're ever concerned about any major changes and you don't want to make them live right away, or you just want to get it cleared or just for peace of mind, you can always come to us first in communications and we can talk through that and make sure everything's set up correctly. So as soon as changes are live, they're the changes you want and expect.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John.
Does anybody else have any questions while we're on the topic? So that is most of what I have for you in terms of the dotCMS training itself. I do want to point out, I will put in the chat pod here a link, and that is a link to some help stuff for you guys. The video recording that I'm making right now will also end up on this site, but it also has a listing of training options, the editor document that goes over how to add images, how to add links, how to add all of that information is available as well as adding editing content, placing existing content, adding new events. These types of things are all available on the website that I just sent through there. And then, like I said, again, I will be adding the video of the recording that I'm making right now to this as soon as I can get it up there. And that way you guys will have an example of what training can go through to review as well. If you do have content questions in the future, you can go ahead and contact communications, your primary communicator, whoever you usually work with. should be able to help you with content-related things. They should be able to help you with some basic dotCMS questions as well. You are welcome to email me as well if you want. I'm often doing things like this, so I'm not always on top of answering everyone's questions as quickly as they might need them. So that's why it's very important that you could probably also talk to your primary communicator, and they should be able to help you with some basic things as well. If it's something that I don't know the answer to, I can always send it on to someone who hopefully will know the answer. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware that you do have that assistance, and as well as all of this information as well to go back and review and check some things if you want to go back and look at some different things as well. So does anybody have any sort of last minute questions before we wrap up? Nope. Okay. Well, that is all I have for you, and thank you for coming to the dotCMS training.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.